And there I was, starred in a Hollywood movie. And we're here with tip number 87-H, and this is going to be one of those quick tips that probably turn into a 9-minute video. Today's video is just going to be all about recording yourself while you're recording yourself. And by that, I mean taking written records of what you are recording in your studio. And what I have here is a correctly labeled binder, Garage Rock, and this is just all of my recording sessions that I've ever done, starting at the third song I've ever recorded. So there's quite a number of things in here. Stuff for my own personal music, stuff I've done with other people, stuff I've done for other people. And I've been keeping track of every single track on one of my recordings for every song. And the way I do it isn't that special. It's not the purpose of this video is to show you how I do it. It's more talking about the process and why I think it's beneficial to write down what you're doing in the recording studio. And there's three kind of points I want to touch upon in explaining that. All right, so let's start with the first reason you're going to write down what you're doing on your tracks. And it's probably the reason you're thinking of. You're probably thinking, Mario, when you get a total shiggity schwack whack dope-ass guitar track recorded, and one day, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, you want to record another track that sounds just like that track. And that's reason number one. And I've actually only ever done that once. I've only ever went back one time to look at how I recorded a previous track. It's more about taking a record of what you had done during that session. So let's move on to the second reason. The second reason is going to be more applicable to if you're working in the real world and not in a DAW. And you know, there's no way, especially on a board like this, doesn't have automatic faders. You know, there's no way to save the settings on your board when you go from, you know, song to song. And, you know, usually it's not a problem if you're working on just one song at a time. Like, for example, for a while I was just recording my own music, so I could leave the board as is while I'm working on a song. But if you're switching through songs, which I currently do because I'm recording, you know, at times like 4 or 5 different songs at once, you know, I can't save the settings, right? I can't save the faders. I can't save the EQ. Every time I open up a new song, I pretty much have to start from scratch, right? So keeping record of what track is on which is very important, just to get your bounds straight. And, you know, when you're starting from a fresh mix down, per se, you know, you could quickly look and see what everything, where everything aligns on the tracks, and you can kind of, you know, mix quicker that way. It's going to take you a lot less time than if you're just going into it blind, right? And I know this seems like a huge hindrance if you are used to working on a computer where you are able to save projects and you can name tracks and you could color code and visually make it all sexy for you to organize it in your brain and look at. That seems like probably a huge detriment that if you're working in the analog real world here and you can't do things like that. But on the contrary to that, I think it forces you to treat every time you start mixing down a song, it's basically like you're starting from fresh. And it really forces you to try different things and actually test test your ears, you know, try to get you into practice of mixing and seeing how different, you know, compression ratios and different EQs and all this is going to play into it, right? So don't think of it necessarily as such a bad thing that you can't save your settings. That I hate saying save your settings. That's like, doesn't really make sense, but you know what I'm trying to say, right? Like starting from scratch is a good thing. It forces you to think fresh, think on your feet, and, you know, I think that helped me personally progress at a really quick rate when I still am, right? Cutting my teeth, learning how to be a recording engineer. And, yeah, let's just move on to the third reason. The third reason is absolutely the biggest reason I suggest you write down everything you do in the recording studio. And this advice, like I say all the time, a lot of my advices I give out in these videos apply to all aspects of life. and this is true for many other things. When you take the time to write something down and mentally process that and solely focus on that one thought, it forces you to pay attention and learn from what you're doing. It helps you remember things. This is why in school they would tell you to still write down the notes even if you're paying attention, because the act of writing it down, there's a connection between the memory part of your brain and like the active part of your brain. That's like science. You can look up fucking papers on that shit, okay? I ain't just making that up, right? So it forces you to really think about what you're doing, and you start learning. You know, when something sounds really good and you're like, oh wow, that sounds great, it makes you think, what the hell did I do to make that happen? And it's very easy to get caught up in the moment when you're recording and tracking, and you're like mixing on the fly, and like, you know, you're overdubbing and everything's starting to come together, and like you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. You're just patching shit, fucking taking jacks, putting them up your ass, doing whatever the hell you can, right? And like you start to lose, you start to stop paying attention, right? There's so many thoughts going on. So that's why I force myself at the end of each session, even if I'm not actively writing it down as I'm doing it, because obviously that would be a huge hindrance while you're recording and experimenting. At the end of the session, I think, okay, what did I actually do on the guitar track? And I, you know, sit there for a moment, okay, and say, okay, I tried that mic first, but I didn't really like it. Then I went to this. Oh, I used the EV635A on the snare drum. That's good, right? Right? Forcing me to think about what I had done, and what in the end of that session of recording, what I wound up liking or didn't like, you know? So I'm just going to show you like how I personally do it. And this is like each song I somehow managed to fit onto one sheet of paper. I don't have one song that I use two. And that at times becomes really difficult, but I've developed my own shorthand. Like if someone else were to pick up these papers, they would have no idea what the hell I did. It's all abbreviations. It's all it's very like to my brain, if that makes sense. So I usually write. Let's try to get a close up here. Maybe I'll put some pictures on the screen. Yeah, I'll take some pictures. All right, so we're looking at the track list, or whatever the hell you want to call this, for Unpack Your Adjectives, song I did with Alex. And on the first line, you see track 2, SB into FOK into MP 5.66, right? So I know that's my Shiny Box mic as a front of kit mic in front of my drums, going into my MP 5.66 preamp. Like I said, if I would have picked this up, only I would know what the hell that means. But you know, I've written that down so many times that I know what that means. You know, and then the second line is, okay, track number 1 is the EV635A on snare into my M67 Shure microphone mixer. Of course, that's like a classic Mario drum setup right there. Then I have track 4, the R18 for the bass amp, and then I have the compression ratio I use while tracking. I'm not going to go through each one. You get the idea of what I'm saying here. I kind of just like write what I did on each track, and sometimes I cross things out. Sometimes I get really complicated with it. Like, let me go to a complicated one. All right, so this one's a little more complicated. This is Little Yellowbird. Track 1, I got an SM57 on the bass drum, half an inch away from left side of the shield. Boosted 600 hertz a little. Track 2, 635A snare, 4 inches above rim. A lot of hi-hat and tom sound. Bogan at 1.5 gain ratio, or gain on the knob. So like you could tell here, like I went into more detail. I was really thinking about what I was doing, and yeah, that's just an example of what I mean. Now, if you take enough records or recordings of your records, you'll end up with, you'll get something like this: the Beatles, the complete Beatles recording session. And this book's actually pretty damn cool. It has literally every single date that was spent in the studio during the Beatles' career. And it literally goes from the very first time that George Martin brings them into the studio to 1970. Like, it has literally every single day in extreme detail, and it literally has everything. And, like, from a business perspective, you know, that was done for an obviously way different reason. But I guess that's reason number 4, right? Like, when you're running a business, you want to keep records of something. And even if we're doing it just for home recording's sake, at the end of the day, I think it's prudent to be organized to agree. I think it really helps you as a recording engineer to be organized and to be able to recollect information like that at will. And you never know when you need to find something really random that you should have just written down in the moment, and you get the idea. I'm going to end this video. I think next video I'm going to swallow fire. All right.